Excuse me. So what I want to speak to you about today is how is this all going to work? Well, I want to talk about AI, digital currency, and Revelation 13, and how we can prepare for Satan's no buy, no sell policy. And none of this can be considered financial advice or legal advice. I'm not qualified to tell you what to do with your 401k. I can't possibly know your entire financial situation. I can't tell you what decisions you should make with this investment or that investment. And when I give these talks, I increasingly get, and it saddens me a little bit, because I get people who come up to me and they want to know how they can maintain their current standard of living during the end times. Yeah, that's not going to happen. I'll just break it to you now. No, I'm just kidding. So, anyways, I can't give you advice, and this should not be considered advice. So, again, I'm a New York attorney. I practiced law in New York for 19 years before transitioning to trade currencies and equity and commodity futures in the financial markets. And it's because I believe God led me there, because I would not have seen what the central banks are doing if I was practicing law. But because of my work in the financial markets, I have to watch what the central banks are doing, because the central banks set interest rate policy, and they move the markets, and they move the bond market, and they move every market, really. But the bond market is the largest market, followed by the foreign exchange market, the currencies market, and everything else. So I need to know what they're doing. Are they going to be dovish? Are they going to be hawkish? Where are we going? So it's because I was monitoring them for my work that I started to see this ramp up towards central bank digital currency during the pandemic. And there was a big ramp up, pushed mostly by the Bank of International Settlements, which I'll explain is this central bank above all the other central banks. So why am I talking to you about this? Well, I believe that I need to warn people about this, because I feel if you can wrap your head around what's coming and how it's playing out, and it may change and it may start to play out different ways, I feel that you won't lose your faith, because you can wrap your head around it, seek God's guidance and wisdom and encouragement and strengthening, and we will all get through this. It's not a problem. God's going to take care of us. It's not a problem at all. But Sister White also instructs us that we are to be Christ's ambassadors, watchmen into the house of Israel, to see the dangers that await souls and give them warning. She said that in the Review and Herald, and also she said in the Review and Herald, the Lord is soon coming. The watchmen on the walls of Zion are called upon to awake to their God-given responsibility. Many of them are in the stupor of insensibility. God calls for watchmen who, in the power of the Spirit, will give to the world a message. Watchmen who will proclaim the time of night. He calls for watchmen who will arouse men and women from their lethargy, lest they sleep the sleep of death. And we don't want that. We don't want to be sleeping Adventists. We don't, the 10 virgins parable is pretty applicable here. We're all kind of sleeping, but if you were prepared for this crisis and you have oil in your lamps, you'll be able to enter with the bridegroom at the wedding. But many people are going to be unprepared, because they're not going to have faith and they're not going to have the Holy Spirit with them. But we want to be constantly seeking the Holy Spirit and seeking to be filled with the Holy Spirit. Sister White also says, God's watchmen are to stand on the walls of Zion and to give warning. The morning cometh, and also the night wherein no man can work. So let's talk about Satan's no buy, no sell policy as it's stated in the Bible. Let's see. Revelation 13:15 through 16 states, and that he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many who would not worship the image of the beast, should be killed. And he caused all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save that he had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. No one is going to be able to escape from having to take this test. We all have a test coming. Are we going to be faithful to God? Are we going to be obedient to God? Or are we going to be afraid to lose our things and our money and not be obedient to God and obey man instead? That's the test that every single one of us are going to have to face, both rich and poor, free and bond. We're all going to have this test. And Sister White warns us that the time is coming when we cannot sell at any price. The decree will soon go forth prohibiting men to buy or sell, save that they have the mark of the beast. Well, I'm going to show you that this technology, they don't even need to decree it. There doesn't even need to be a law passed. This technology is such that it's just a line of code, really. They can affect whether or not you can buy or sell based on programmability, based on just a line of code, and I'll show you that. So it's fascinating that she keeps talking about decrees and stuff, but they don't even need that. In the last great conflict of the controversy with Satan, those who are loyal to God will see every earthly support cut off because they refuse to break his law in obedience to earthly powers. They will be forbidden to buy or sell. It will be finally decreed that they shall be put to death. But we have the promise of Revelation 3:5. He that overcometh, the same shall be clothed in white raiment, and I will not blot his name out of the book of life, but I will confess his name before my Father and before the angels. So let's look at how CBDC comes into Satan's no buy, no sell policy. And what are CBDCs? So central bank digital currency, like I said this morning, is fully programmable, fully traceable digital currency that is centralized and distributed by a government or its central bank. Because it's centralized to one authority, as opposed to being decentralized, it is fully controlled and programmed by the authority that issues it. That means that the government with central bank digital currency can, one, surveil all your financial transactions in real time, and two, control when, where, and upon what you can spend the currency. And why is this a threat to our liberty and our religious liberty? With CBDCs, the government would have the authority to decide and the power to enforce, just technically, just by a line of code, how you may or may not spend the CBDC that's assigned to your digital wallet, which would be tied to your digital ID. So it will also require digital wallets and digital IDs. CBDCs have no purpose other than to financially constrain the user in any way that the government wishes to constrain the user, to elicit whatever behavior it wants from the user. And why should you listen to me? Don't listen to me. Let's listen to the central bankers tell you themselves what CBDC can do. So this gentleman is the general manager of the Bank of International Settlements. And in October 2020, he was describing the difference between cash and digital currency. And you can find this video online. It's on YouTube and Rumble and all the video places. And he said, he comes right out and tells you what CBDC can do. We tend to establish the equivalence with cash. There is a huge difference there. For example, in cash, we don't know, for example, who is using a $100 bill today. We don't know who is using a $1,000 peso bill today. The key difference with CBDC is that the central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of that expression of central bank liability, and will have the technology to enforce that. That's the general manager from the Bank of International Settlements telling you that with CBDC, it's different from cash, because cash, when you use cash, you're anonymous. You're in total anonymity. No one can stop you from buying or selling. Nobody can stop you from exchanging that cash, and the government can't track what you buy or sell if you're using cash. But with CBDC, they can see exactly what you're buying and selling, and they can stop you from buying or selling whatever it is they want to stop you from doing. If you're not compliant with their mandates, they can stop you from doing that. They'll have the technology to stop you from using the CBDC. They'll have the technology to say that you can only spend it on these certain things. They'll have the technology to say, we're freezing your funds because we don't like the way you're behaving. We didn't like your attendance at this protest. we didn't like what you posted on social media, they can control your money. And he's basically saying that. And the Bank of International Settlements is the central bank above all the other central banks. All the central banks go to them for facilitation of cross-border settlements and such, and facilitation of money that crosses between central banks. So to summarize, with a CBDC, a central bank or a government can seal your transactions in real time and tax you instantly, mandate that any and all shots or medical procedures must be taken. They'll have the ability to turn off your money or freeze your balances if you don't comply. They can turn off your money if they don't like what you post on social media. They can turn off your money if they don't like your religious beliefs or practices. If the government passed a Sunday law mandating that all people worship on Sunday, the government could turn off your money or otherwise restrict the spending of the CBDC in your assigned digital wallet if you don't comply. The CBDC could be programmed to expire within 30 days or any time period, forcing you to spend the money and convert it to goods before it expires worthless. And they actually like that feature because it allows them to control the money supply even more effectively and control how many dollars are actually circulating. Your money can be programmed so that it cannot be used to buy certain foods, goods, or services. So if there was a push towards climate change measures, if they deemed your carbon footprint or carbon score was too high, they could say you can't take this flight, you can't book this flight, or you can't book this rental car. You've done too much. The central bank could institute negative interest rates, which would cause a portion of your money to be periodically deducted from your digital wallet. And this isn't unheard of because when we were near zero rates, there was the fear that we could go below zero rates. And the Bank of Japan instituted a negative interest rate policy in 2016, and they maintained that through 2023. So it's not unheard of to go negative interest rates. And that just means that a bit of your money comes out of your account. You lose money. When you have money in your account in a positive interest rate environment, you get money. In a negative interest rate environment, you lose money. So that's the way interest rates work. But if you're in cash, they can't take your money. So let's look at what Neil Kashkari said. He's the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. He basically said in this interview where he was asked about CBDC, he basically said CBDC doesn't actually solve problems other than to enable central bankers to monitor all transactions, impose negative interest rates, which is a deduction from your account, and deduct taxes directly from your accounts in real time. They don't add anything novel to the market as far as benefits for you. They only have benefits for the government or the central bank to monitor all your transactions and control your behavior. And this is what he actually said. He was asked about CBDC, and he said, I keep asking anybody at the Fed or outside the Fed to explain to me what problem this is solving. He said, I can send anybody in this room $5 with Venmo right now. And there was laughter in the background. He said, right? No, seriously. So what is it that a CBDC could do that Venmo can't do? And all I get is a bunch of hand waving. Well, China's doing it. Well, I see why China would do it, he said. If they want to monitor every one of your transactions, you could do that with a central bank digital currency. You can't do that with Venmo. If you want to impose negative interest rates, you could do that with a central bank digital currency. You can't do that with Venmo. And if you want to directly tax customer accounts, you could do that with a central bank digital currency. You can't do that with Venmo. So I get China would be interested, but why would the American people be for that? And the answer is the American people would not be for that if they understood it. Also, let's see. So IMF Deputy Managing Director Bo Li, who is formerly the Deputy Governor of the People's Bank of China, talked about programmability at an IMF panel in 2023. And what he said was, financial inclusion is through what we call programmability. That is, CBDC can allow government agencies and private sector players to program, to create smart contracts, to allow targeted policy functions. For example, welfare payment. For example, consumption coupon. For example, food stamp. He said, by programming CBDC, those monies can be precisely targeted for what kind of people can own and what kind of people can use the money and how it can be utilized. For example, for food. So this potential programmability can help government agencies to precisely target their support to those people who need support, so that way they can improve financial inclusion. And that's another buzzword that they say around these things. It's financial inclusion. It's basically including you in their surveillance system to surveil you financially, is what it is. That's really what it is. But that's another central banker telling you what CBDC can do. Let's look at what Professor Richard Werner, he's one of the most brilliant economists in the world. He was interviewed for this documentary called The End of Money, CBDC, The End of Money. And what he said about it is really illustrative. There's a lot that he says, but it's very illustrative of what CBDCs can do to restrict you. He is a professor of banking and economics. He's a lecturer at the University of Oxford. He's the author of the book Princes of the Yen. He's the father of the quantitative easing monetary concept, and he's an expert on central banks and CBDCs. So what he said was, CBDCs are presented as if it is something brand new, when the reality is that we've been using BDCs, bank digital currencies, for many decades. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing new about that. It works well. The bank digital currencies, that's our current system. So the only difference is the central aspect. And who's pushing for this? Well, the central planners, meaning the central bankers, are pushing for this. He said, is there a need for it? No, there's absolutely no need for this, because the current financial system doesn't have any problems in terms of settlement of transactions, because you have choice. Once you introduce CBDCs, there's many risks and dangers of that, but one obvious one is that you're actually going to reduce choices, because for CBDCs to properly do their job, from the perspective of the issuer, from the central banks, you need to get rid of the competition. You need to get rid of cash. That's actually a declared goal of CBDCs, he says. You've got plenty of studies by central banks and other economists in favor of CBDCs, arguing that we need to abolish cash and then introduce CBDCs, because then we can have negative interest rates. We can take money directly out of people's pockets. While you still have cash, you can flee from the financial system and put your money in cash, and then they can't punish you with negative interest rates. That's why they want to abolish cash. But most of all, the really big dangers of CBDCs are the programmability, which is essentially, it's not even money. Your money becomes potential money, because it depends on a central bank to agree that you should now be allowed to spend this money in this location for this particular transaction and then this particular volume, if you want to do so. But why should that be conditional? When they describe programmability, that's what this is all about. So programmability means they can program the terms under which you can spend your money, and they can control whether you're allowed to spend it, how much you can spend, can you do it for this transaction at this location? That's what the programmability is. And he says the push for CBDCs is the final step in a multi-decade program by central planners to increase their power over the people, over countries. This is the ultimate step, because the powers of CBDCs are so extraordinary that, even the worst dictators in past centuries could only have dreamt of having such enormous power over the lives of so many people. That's the reality of CBDCs and what they can do. One counter-argument against this would be to say, well, okay, it's a power tool for central planners, but surely they're too busy. And how could they ever plan and micromanage, 80 million people in Germany and, all these millions of people? Well, that's where AI comes in, isn't it? In other words, it will be algorithms that will, for the most of the majority, control their spending in the future. The micromanaging decision will then be automated. That's even more dystopian. You have no right to appeal the algorithm because there's so many masses, you can't practically have an appeal process. You just won't be able to use your money for certain things, and there's nothing you can do. And that's coming from a professor of economics. And this is the address where he talked about that. In July 2023, Brazil had their CBDC pilot. They had released the code to the public to take a look at. And a blockchain developer took a look at the code, and he found that their CBDC contained code that would allow Brazil's central bank to, at will, freeze and unfreeze accounts, increase and decrease account balances, move currency from one address to another address, and create or burn digital real from a specific address. Digital real is their CBDC in Brazil. And they're working on it. They're still in the pilot stage, I believe. So this is a worldwide thing. CBDCs are being explored, tested, and developed worldwide. Like I said this morning, 134 countries and currency unions representing 90% of global GDP are exploring a CBDC. There's a number of places in the Caribbean and in Nigeria where they launched the CBDC. And they're not being adopted. They find that in the areas where they've launched the CBDCs, that no one wants to use it, surprisingly. They think it's surprising. I don't think it's very surprising. No one wants to be enslaved by their government. But they think it's surprising that they've had such low adoption. In Nigeria, they have like 0.5% adoption. No one wants to be surveilled there, but Bitcoin is huge. You know, they use a lot of Bitcoin in transactions there because they don't want to be surveilled by the government. Imagine that. So, in a 2022 survey conducted by the Bank of International Settlements, revealed that 93% of the central banks it surveyed had or were developing a CBDC, and it was projected there could be 15 retail CBDCs publicly circulating by 2030. And right now, so this is as of September 2024, this is both retail and wholesale CBDCs. That was the most recently that this chart was updated by CBDC, by the Atlantic Council. This is both retail and wholesale CBDCs. So retail CBDC is the CBDC that would be issued to the consumer from the central bank. Wholesale CBDC is CBDC that's transferred between financial institutions and banks. So there's a slight difference there. And this is the retail only as of September 2024, when was the last time this was updated. So you can see many of these countries are in various stages of development of CBDC around the world. And this is retail only as by cbdctracker.org as of January 4th. And you can see like how many countries, this is pretty much the whole world. This is a worldwide global thing. They're being pushed around the world to develop CBDC, primarily by the Bank of International Settlements, but also by the UN, also by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, also by the Rockefeller Foundation. Those are primarily the parties that are pushing for this. And so there's two different ways they could do a CBDC if they were to do a CBDC. There's one model, which is the direct issue model, where the CBDC is directly issued from the central bank to the consumer. That would basically cut banks out of the middle. The other is the synthetic CBDC model, where the CBDC would be issued by the Federal Reserve or by a central bank to the banks and then to the consumer. And that is what Powell has repeatedly said a number of times would be the model we would pursue in the United States. He said before the U.S. Senate Banking Committee on March 7th, if we were ever to do something like this, and we're a very long way from ever thinking about it, he keeps saying this, we're not even thinking about CBDC. I'll show you that's not true, by the way. I'll show you he's lying. But we're not even thinking about the CBDC. We would do this through the banking system, Powell said. The last thing we would want with the Federal Reserve would be to have individual accounts for all Americans, or any Americans for that matter. He said that before the Senate Banking Committee. And he also said it in September 2022 during an event hosted by the Bank of France. He said if we were to have a CBDC, it would at a minimum have 4 characteristics. First, it would be intermediated. That means it would be the synthetic model. So it would be the Federal Reserve, a major bank, and then you. So the CBDC would go from the Federal Reserve to the major bank, who would issue it to you in your accounts. Second is privacy protected, but third is identity verified, meaning it would not be anonymous. So there's no anonymity with CBDC. It would be tied to your digital wallet, which would be tied to your digital ID. And then fourth is transferable or interoperable. But still, CBDCs, even in the synthetic model, they would still be fully traceable, programmable, and seizable, and tied to your digital ID. And every transaction would still be recorded, monitored, and programmed and controlled by the major bank on behalf of the Federal Reserve. So it's really the same thing, whether it's synthetic or direct issue CBDC. And Christine Lagarde, the president of the European Central Bank, she also said that she's said a number of things. She's said that there will be control, and she said it would also be the synthetic model in Europe if they were to do this in Europe. And they are working on this in Europe. They're in the development stage of a CBDC in Europe, a digital euro. She said it would be through the distribution by supervised intermediaries, meaning banks would issue it to the consumers from the ECB. But she also said there would be control. She said there would be limitations on the amounts of digital euros that individuals or businesses may hold in their digital wallets. And they said in page 12 of their report that holding limits were identified as an effective tool. So they're telling you right now, you're not going to be able to have as much money as you want. You're not going to have as many digital euros as you want to accumulate. They're going to put a limitation on how much money you're allowed to have in your account. So she also was talking about cash. She was prank called, and this prank call went viral. And it's on YouTube, and it was on Twitter and everything. And she said in the call that she acknowledged that spending 1,000 euros already in Europe puts you on the gray market, which is illegal, which means you can be arrested. But she went even further to say that she thinks it's dangerous for people to have 300 or 400 euros in cash that they could spend. They don't like that they can't see what you're doing with your money. They want to control that. She actually thought she was speaking to the president of the Ukraine, and she was not. She was being pranked. It was very funny. It's a very funny call if you get a chance to watch it. Let's see. So Rich Turin, he's one of the writers that talks about this industry, and this is from his blog called Cashless. And he argued that CBDC and digital wallets are making credit cards increasingly obsolete. And he said sovereignty of payment systems means that governments and regulators are pushing against foreign organizations owning the supply of money. And the ECB stated that that was one of the motivations for their digital euro. They didn't like, a lot of these central bankers saw what was happening with crypto and digital currency in the private market, and they didn't like that that was becoming so popular. They didn't want to lose control of the currency game. You know, they didn't want to lose control of currency. So that was one of their motivations to come out with CBDC, because they wanted to compete with cryptocurrency, is basically what he said. So what do we have in the US right now? As of July 2023, FedNow launched the FedNow Instant Payment System. And all this is, it's not a CBDC, but it's a foundation upon which a CBDC could eventually be built. It lays the foundation for a US CBDC. It's just a fast payment transfer system. And what it does is it allows the banks that sign up as financial institutions access to instant money, so they can offer to their customers, those banks can offer to their customers programs like Zelle or Cash App, or some instant transfer of money, so you don't have to wait. Like with ACH, you have to wait like 1 to 3 days. With wire transfers are instant, but you have to pay for them. This would you'd be able to offer free, fast payment service if you sign up with FedNow on the FedNow platform. Now, when the Fed launched this, they said their goal was 10,000 financial institutions to sign on as participants. But as of January 31st, I just checked, they only had 1,210 banks and financial institutions signed up. So they're a little behind the ball on this one. They can't really get people to want to do this. Even banks, they can't even get the banks to want to do this. There's only 34 liquidity agents, settlement agents and liquidity providers, and 36 service providers. So it hasn't really taken off. Jerome Powell, when he was testifying before the U.S. Senate Banking Committee, said on March 7, 2024, "We're nowhere near adopting a CBDC." He said, "We're nowhere near recommending, let alone adopting, a central bank digital currency in any form," he said, adding that people don't need to worry about it. Well, I'll show you that that's not true. It's a lie, because both the Fed, the Boston Fed, and MIT have been working on a multi-year exploratory research project called Project Hamilton. Project Hamilton has been extremely successful. In December 2022, they reported that their open CBDC core processing engine for money, it has a code base that supports 1.84 million transactions per second, and settlement, meaning the transaction is completed in under 1 second. That exceeded their initial throughput requirements. It exceeded their imagination of how fast they could do this. And it's 1.8 million transactions per second is an order of magnitude above what we see now with like credit cards, stuff like that. So it's extremely successful, and it's basically done, and it's basically waiting on the shelf. So he's not accurate. It's not accurate for him to say, we're not even thinking about CBDC. They've actually tested it, and their tests have been very successful. But he was asked by Senator Loomis, do you still agree that a Federal Reserve cannot introduce a CBDC without congressional authorization? And he agreed, yes, I do. So he's acknowledged the Fed won't just do this. They won't just spring this on people. They want to be told by Congress, pursue a CBDC, bring us a CBDC. That would have to be, in my opinion, according to some crisis, such as the last pandemic or something like that. I would think it would need to be even more than that, something on the scale of a global cyber attack would have to bring this on, because nobody wants this. And it's very difficult to get people away from cash. So I think that it's my opinion they need a crisis to bring this about, and it would be something on the order of magnitude of a global security cyber crisis, cyber attack. But if we did have a crisis, how fast do we think Congress could act in that situation? Congress is usually pretty slow moving, right? It's hard to get them to do things that would actually help people. But with the last pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic was first reported to the World Health Organization on December 31st, 2019, and the CARES Act and the PrEP Act were signed into law, passed by Congress and signed into law on March 27th, 2020. That's only 2 months and 26 days after the pandemic was reported to the WHO, and Congress acted that quickly. So Congress has shown that they can act quickly in a crisis if they want to. Another development was that the SWIFT Global Messaging Network announced in March of 2024 that it was planning to launch a CBDC platform in 1 to 2 years. This is really significant because SWIFT is a vast messaging network for financial institutions, and it allows them to quickly and accurately send and securely send or receive information like money transfers. It connects over 11,000 banking and securities organizations in more than 200 countries. And for an example of how vast it is, in November 2022, an average of 44.8 million messages a day were sent through the SWIFT network. So this is an important global network. And they said that they were ready to launch a platform in 1 to 2 years. And they said this in March of 2024. They were ready to go. And what was significant, I believe, was that they demonstrated that they could ensure that different countries' CBDCs could be used together and accommodated by their platform. So if you have different countries that are developing a CBDC, I know it's very technical and everything, but there's different protocols they can build them on and different platforms, crypto platforms they can build them on. They can do it in many different ways, and they said their platform could accommodate all of them. It didn't matter what protocol was used to build the CBDC or what technical platform it was built on. They could still accommodate it, the SWIFT network, and they were ready to launch in 1 to 2 years. So the world is moving very quickly towards a CBDC system. The Bank of International Settlements also said that 86 of their central banks in the 2023 survey, we talked about the 2022 survey earlier, 81% of the world's population and 94% of global economic output responded, and they said that they were working on a CBDC. And what was interesting to me was there was questions in the report that they were asked about what kind of features they would want. And some of the features have to do with control. And almost half said that they liked the obligation for merchants to require it. They wanted limits on interest, limits on balances, limits on transactions, and embedded capital flow management things. So, capital flow management measures. So, they also favored programmable payments and programmable money. So, this is what the central banks are generally thinking about this. They like to have that control. So Catherine Austin Fitts, she is a really interesting lady. She's an investment banker. When she talks about her background, she says she was groomed to be a central banker. She was headed in that direction, and they actually asked her to be on the board of governors or something like that, or somehow involved in the central bank, and she declined it. But she understands how they talk, and she understands what they do at the Federal Reserve and at these central banks. And she gave a talk at Hillsdale College on November 11th of 2024 and talked about CBDC. And the way she explains it is that we don't have a financial problem in this country. We have a secret governance problem. We have a secret governance system that's not transparent, and it's centralized and controlled. And she said we're seeing new and potentially wonderful digital technology used to further centralize control in area after area in all aspects of our lives. She said the problem is not so much with the tools themselves, but with the secret governance system and how they decide to use it. She said, I believe there's only one way to stop the move to total central control, and that is by preventing control of our digital transactions and our financial transactions. So she's saying that to prevent this move of total central control, you need to preserve cash. You need to not have everything go digital, because once everything goes digital, then they control it. So if you can prevent everything from going digital and at least preserve cash, and she's working with the governments in Tennessee, the legislature in Tennessee, to try to preserve cash, preserve gold and silver, that type of thing. Once everything goes digital, then you lose control over it, is basically what she's saying. And she said the going direct reset, the World Economic Forum calls it the greater reset. This is a completely different reset than what we've ever seen, and that is because an all-digital technology, an all-digital monetary system gives you the ability to do something very radical. As an example of this, she talked about how Biden's nominee for control of the currency, who didn't get passed, had published a month before her nomination an article in Vanderbilt Law Review, and she said, the wonderful thing about central bank digital currency is inflation is no longer a problem. If you have inflation, you just freeze everybody's bank accounts. That's not a solution, but that's what you can do with a CBDC. With central bank digital currency, you can just freeze everybody's bank accounts. It's not a problem. It's a little bit of a problem. She said the important thing to understand about central bank digital currency in an all-digital financial system is it's not a currency, it's a control grid. It's a way of controlling the masses. It's not a currency. So she also said the process to implement central bank digital currency around the world is being overseen by the Bank of International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, and the Bank of International Settlements is also owned by the New York Fed, the Fed, and all the 63 top central banks. And they're all pushing to implement CBDCs around the world and prototyping them. So she gave a further talk earlier in June 2024 about CBDCs, where she said even more about them. She said that, let's go to the next one. She said, if you look at the central bankers who want and are pushing the CBDC system, they have no intention of being reasonable. And digital technology allows them to reset the economy and reset the governance and management system on planet Earth to a wholly new system. You cannot fathom where these people want to go, she says. Let's go back to the lockdowns. If I don't want you leaving your house, it's really easy to enforce this with CBDCs. I can simply say, your money won't work. You can shop online and have it delivered, but your money won't work outside of your home. You can't buy gas, you can't buy food, you can't travel. Your money won't work because it's programmed. And the reality is, with AI and software, they can manage you one person at a time. So the rules that can be applied to you are totally different than the rules that can be applied to your wife. So with the social credit system, if your wife is behaving better than you, they will custom design the controls. Ultimately, this entire system can be run from Basel, Switzerland, which can be run by Lockheed Martin and BlackRock. And when she says it can be run by Basel, Switzerland is the location of the Bank of International Settlements, their headquarters. They're in Basel, Switzerland. She's basically saying that the whole thing can be run by the Bank of International Settlements, which can be run by Lockheed Martin and BlackRock. So it's very interesting. However, on January 16, 2025, Bessent is Trump's Treasury Secretary pick, and he said, and this is good news, he sees no reason for the U.S. to have a central bank digital currency. So that's good news. The whole world is moving in that direction. So eventually there's going to be pressure put on the United States to move in that direction, but he sees no reason for it. So that's encouraging. It's also encouraging that on January 2023, President Trump issued an executive order that would ban a CBDC. That's nice. That's good. But he's only in office for the next 4 years. So what happens after he leaves office? But anyway, let's look at this. Let's look at this executive order. It revokes former President Biden's executive order titled, it was 14067, titled Ensuring Responsible Development of Digital Assets. And I've spoken about this executive order before, 14067. So this is revoked. So President Biden's executive order basically asked all the agencies to start investigating and researching a CBDC, and this revokes that. It also revokes the Department of Treasury's framework of July 7th, 2022. It revokes all policies and guidance that may have been issued relative to both Biden's executive order and the Treasury's framework from 2022. And Trump's executive order states as follows: by the authority vested in me as President by the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America in order to promote United States leadership in digital assets and financial technology while protecting economic liberty is hereby ordered as follows. So it's good that he wants to promote economic liberty. That's good. He's also asking to us to be a leader in digital assets. And like Catherine Austin Fitts said, if you go to an all-digital system, you lose control of everything. So there's the danger in that. Section 1 is where he talks about CBDC. And he says in his executive order, the digital asset industry plays a crucial role in innovation and economic development in the United States, as well as our nation's international leadership. It is therefore the policy of my administration to support responsible growth and use of digital assets, blockchain technology, and related technologies across all sectors of the economy, including by taking measures to protect Americans from the risks of central bank digital currencies. That's good. Good. Again, it's only for the next 4 years, but that's good. Which threaten the stability of the financial system, individual privacy, and the sovereignty of the United States, including by prohibiting the establishment, issuance, and circulation and use of a CBDC within the jurisdiction of the United States. So that's good. That's good that he issued this executive order that prohibits the establishment, issuance, and circulation of a CBDC. He defines CBDC as a form of digital money or monetary value denominated in the national unit of account that's a direct liability on the central bank. And Section 5 specifically prohibits central bank digital currencies. Agencies are prohibited from undertaking any action to establish, issue, or promote CBDCs. And any ongoing plans or initiatives at any agency related to the creation of the CBDC should be immediately terminated, and no further action may be taken to develop or implement such plans or initiatives. So that's good. Again, it's only for 4 years, but it's it's a step in the right direction. But he's also promoting digital assets. And he defines a digital asset as any digital representation of value that's recorded on a distributed ledger, including cryptocurrencies, digital tokens, and stablecoins. He says, the digital asset industry plays a crucial role in innovation and economic development in the United States. And it's the policy of his administration to support the responsible growth and use of digital assets, blockchain technology, and related technologies across all sectors of the economy, including by protecting and promoting the ability of individual citizens and private sector entities alike to access and use for lawful purposes open public blockchain networks without persecution, and to develop and deploy software, particularly in mining and validating, to transact with other persons without unlawful censorship, and to maintain self-custody of digital assets. Good. All good. But again, if you're going to an all-digital system, that's where you lose control, because stable coins are just as programmable, just as surveillable, and just as seizable as CBDC is. So yes, he's promoting all these digital assets, but it's the going to the all-digital system that is the danger. He also wants to protect the sovereignty of the U.S. dollar through actions to promote development and growth of legitimate dollar-backed stablecoins. That's a problem, because stablecoins issued by banks are just as surveillable, programmable, and seizable as a CBDC issued by a bank would be. There's not really any difference there. And Jerome Powell has already said, if we're going to do the CBDC, it would be issued through banks, through stablecoins. All the major banks are working on stablecoins right now. JP Morgan has JPM Coin, which they just renamed Connexus. Wells Fargo is working on a stablecoin. PayPal has PYUSD. So yes, he's promoting stablecoins, dollar-backed stablecoins, but if it's issued by a bank, it's still just as dangerous as the CBDC. Let's see. So let's talk about tokenization, which is basically the stable coins and the whole tokens thing. Ed Dowd is the equity investment executive founding partner of Finance Technologies, and he posted on Telegram, "We are sleepwalking towards the biggest asset grab of the history of the planet. They're trying to destroy farms, land, businesses, freedoms, housing, individual wealth, travel, and own them or sell them off to the highest bidder. And at the same time, they are trying to ring-fence society into the entrapment of being controlled by data, either through health passports or the slow mission creep towards central bank digital currencies." He says, "It's a giant asset grab of what we own and control. They frame all of this as being in our best interest, but it's the biggest swindle ever. This gargantuan virtue contract also comes with a huge slice of authoritarianism." And what he's talking about is tokenization. Advocates claim that tokenization on blockchains platforms offers benefits including increased liquidity, accessibility for investors, reduced counterparty risk, enhanced transparency and auditability, and lower transaction costs. And that's true. But it also limits, if you tokenize everything, if it's tokenized on a public blockchain, it is more secure. But if it's on a private blockchain, such as one run by the banks, then it's a little less secure. Or at least there's more control that can be exercised by the bank over that token. So what's a blockchain? A blockchain is a decentralized digital ledger that securely stores and records across a network of computers in a way that is transparent, immutable, and resistant to tampering. Each block in the chain contains data, a timestamp, and a cryptographic hash of the previous block. And that way it forms a chain where each additional block links to the ones before it. So it makes blockchain transactions resistant to alteration because changing any block would require altering all subsequent blocks, and obtaining network consensus to accept these changes should be difficult in a decentralized blockchain. But if you have a centralized blockchain, it's not difficult because it's centralized with one authority. Right now, securities are offered for sale on the blockchain, represented by digital tokens. Banks and financial institutions are developing their own stablecoins, and real-world assets are being tokenized around the world. And there are developments around tokenizing natural assets or natural capital, meaning hectares of land, rivers, streams, bodies of waters are being tokenized so that they can be traded. So that's what Ed Dowd was referring to when he says they're trying to, tokenize things so that they can sell them off to the highest bidder. Tokenization of real-world assets involves converting tangible assets into digital tokens using blockchain technology. The proponents say that this process enhances liquidity, transparency, accessibility, allowing a broader range of individuals to engage with high-value assets. And it can include assets like stocks, bonds, equities, as well as real estate, art, commodities, and intellectual property. So they want to tokenize everything. Proponents also say that tokenization transforms and democratizes financial and investment spheres by making them more inclusive and more accessible. Again, you see that word about inclusion. It also increases the liquidity of previously illiquid assets, such as high-value property, because if they can divide them into smaller, affordable tokens, then you can have fractional ownership of a valuable piece of property. It also eliminates legal hassles and allows for more efficient ownership transfer and asset management. And let's see the next slide. So the Boston Consulting Group and ADDX studied this, and they forecasted that by 2030, 16 trillion worth of assets could be tokenized. I've actually seen experts say that 30 trillion of assets could be tokenized by 2030. And again, it's a process where assets like stocks, bonds, real estate, your car, your house could be transformed into a digital chip that can then be issued and traded in real time. That's what tokenization is. And so Rich Turin, who writes about these things on his cashless blog, he said, tokenization is the new rails of finance. And tokenization is real, and any asset that can be tokenized eventually will be tokenized. This is the way they're looking at this. Just tokenizing everything, making everything could be digitally traded at that point. He says, industry insiders are painting a clear picture that tokenization, with its potential to streamline regulated asset transfer significantly, isn't a pipe dream, but it's the future of financial markets. So they're all seeing this as the future, that this is the direction financial markets are going, to trade tokenized real-world assets. In April 2024, it was reported that Tether announced an upcoming release of a multi-chain tokenization platform. They were preparing the release of an in-house developed tokenization solution. It would be a white label multi-chain tokenization platform available to everyone. So these private companies are working on this. And so it would tokenize, securities, stocks, bonds, equities. Investopedia defines a tokenized equity as a digital asset or coin that represents the shares of a corporation or organization. CoinDesk reported in March of 2024 that over 1 billion in U.S. Treasury notes have been tokenized on public blockchains already. That was as of March 2024. Tokenized treasuries are basically digital representations of U.S. government bonds that can be traded as tokens on the blockchain. So that's already 1 billion already has been tokenized. And they're tokenized through public blockchains like Ethereum, Polygon, Avalanche, Stellar, and the market value has risen nearly tenfold since January of 2023. So this is how fast they're moving. Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, he's been a strong advocate for tokenization. He believes it to be the future of the financial markets. He stated that it's the next generation for markets, and the next generation for securities will be tokenization of securities. They entered the tokenization race with a new fund that they built on the Ethereum network, which is called BUIDL, is the name of their fund. And they made a strategic investment in an asset tokenization company called Securitize. So they're moving forward with this. They started their real-world tokenization fund, BUIDL, and they also invested in Securitize, and they consider this the latest progression of their digital asset strategy. They're focused on developing solutions in the digital asset space that help solve real problems for our clients, and we're excited to work with Securitize. So and President Trump is promoting this. The whole industry is going this way. So it's great that he is putting a ban on CBDCs and prohibiting CBDCs, but that's just your money. Tokenization is everything else. That's all the other things. That's tokenizing all of the other assets. And I'll show you that the Bank of International Settlements wants to control everything that's tokenized. So what does it mean to tokenize real-world assets? Well, it's tokenizing ownership of precious metals, arts, homes, and everything on the blockchain. So it's like I try to explain this to people. It's kind of like thinking of a digital poker chip that would be encoded with information about the asset that would be stored on a blockchain, and it could be traded on the blockchain platform. That's kind of a simple way to think about it. It lowers the cost. Like people who talk about the advantages, they're right when they say it lowers the cost by removing middlemen like lawyers and bankers and stuff like that. You can trade efficiently 24/7. It lowers the barrier to entry and creates more liquidity. Yes, it does all those things. But you also are going to lose control of your asset eventually. So initially, JP Morgan had started a digital assets platform called Onyx. And they were looking to unleash the power of tokenization. And they had a pipeline of different assets that they were going to onboard onto this platform to tokenize. In May 2024, they reported that the existing products on the blockchain platform had processed over 1.2 trillion of notional trade volume, and they had more than 10 live clients consisting of banks, broker-dealers, and asset managers, and they were looking to expand that number and expand the sets of asset classes that would be brought onto the platform. And then later, as of November 6, 2024, they reported that they had executed over 1.5 trillion in transactions, and mostly repos and cross-border payments. So this is increasing. They went from 1.2 trillion to 1.5 trillion. It's processing transactions amounting to an average of more than 2 billion a day. And its clients are large companies like Siemens, BlackRock, and Ant International. 2 billion a day is a lot, but it's still relatively small compared to their 10 trillion in conventional assets that they process every day. But it's still, they're moving in that direction. And they've since rebranded Onyx, and they call it Kinexys now. So let's see. So according to CoinDesk, this tokenization of real-world assets, such as traditional financial instruments, is really fast growing. And we can see that with the way these companies are moving. It is moving fast. They're all developing it. JP Morgan was one of the early leaders with Onyx, and they've renamed their JPM coin to Kinexys Digital Payments. But they're all doing this. All the big banks are developing their own stable coins, which is in line with President Trump's digital assets push. So Kinexys Digital Assets is a blockchain-based platform owned by JP Morgan for multiple solutions that include intraday repo transactions, tokenized collateral, and bond issuance. JP Morgan has been tokenizing corporate deposits on the blockchain as well. And the attractiveness is that you could settle transactions almost instantly instead of in just one day. And that's what they like about this. They're also saying that they can enable foreign exchange settlement on the chain, initially in US dollars and euros, and they plan to expand to more currencies, and they expect this integration to be available by the first quarter of 2025. So that would allow for near real-time FX transactions and settlement. So I know this all sounds very technical and everything, but this is, I think you can see how fast this is moving. They're all developing and going this way. A JP Morgan representative said clients will be able to execute near real-time FX transactions and settlement by connecting to the global FX platform as early as first quarter of 2025, and it would reduce FX settlement risk and speed up trade settlements. It also lays the groundwork for future automation of 24/7 near real-time multi-currency clearing and settlement based on what the clients define and how they instruct them to do that. So that's where they announced it in Singapore. So tokenization of natural assets like hectares of land, this is also a concept that they're all pursuing. And they're leveraging the blockchain to convert ownership rights of land into digital tokens. The advocates claim that it enables creation of a secure, transparent, and tradable market for natural resources such as forests, water rights, minerals, and they also claim that by doing this, they can create economic incentives for conservation and for preserving ecosystems. Bricken has been working on converting ownership rights of physical assets into digital tokens, traded on a blockchain network as well. But so see, all of these things, all of these tokenization developments, tokens and stablecoins, if they're on a public blockchain, great, that's decentralized. That is more resistant to centralized control. But if they're centralized with one authority, like a bank, then you have a risk of losing control of your asset because the bank can decide what you can do with that asset because it's tokenized. And in a recent interview, investigative journalist Whitney Webb, she also said stablecoins, while they're a private sector digital asset, they're just as programmable, just as surveillable, and just as seizable as CBDCs are. And then it's a threat to our financial privacy and ultimately our financial freedom. And she's absolutely right about that. Tokenization carries the same risks that CBDCs do in that they're not private, they are programmable, and they take from you what control you think you have over the asset and transfer it to the entity that controls the programmable ledger that holds a digital token. So there's a difference between the bank's blockchains and the blockchains that crypto users use, which are public and therefore not as easily to control because it's a distributed ledger. Banks' blockchains are basically only centralized databases. But if it's public and it's decentralized and there's many parties, then it's less subject to that control. And again, we talked about what a blockchain was. It's a decentralized digital ledger that securely stores records across a network of computers that's transparent, immutable, and resistant to tampering. Each block has a timestamp. And the structure makes the transactions resistant to alteration. If it's decentralized, then it's resistant to tampering. But you could see many types of versions of blockchains. There's a public one with no central control. That's the best because it's distributed. There's no central control. But then there's hybrid ones where it can be controlled by one authority with some permissions, or controlled by one authority and totally private, or controlled by a group, like a consortium. So, let's see. So, the characteristics of a permission blockchain, which is not ideal, is decisions are authorized by a private group of people, decentralization isn't fixed, and transparency is not required. We don't want that. You don't want to be on a permission blockchain because of these risks. So again, with a centralized blockchain, control is managed by one entity, where in a decentralized blockchain, control is distributed across a network of entities. Data management and security are also issues between centralized and decentralized blockchains. So why does all of this matter? Why does all this matter? Centralized versus decentralized? It matters because the Bank of International Settlements wants a centralized blockchain ledger where they control everything. And they said that in their annual report. The tokenization of private assets on the global unified ledger is what the Bank of International Settlements released in their 2023 annual report. or their 2022 annual report released on June 20th, 2023. And the title of the report was Blueprint for the Future Monetary System, Improving the Old and Enabling the New. And basically, they're calling for a plan to tokenize all assets, all privately held assets, your house, your car, your land, your house, everything, on a global unified ledger. And they anticipate in their report that it could be tokenized on another blockchain, but feed into their ledgers with APIs. So it's it's an amazing plan. So a token, like it shows you in the little picture there, imagine a digital poker chip with the rules as to what the asset can and can't do, smart contracts, and information as to what the asset is, where it comes from, who owns it, and everything. So it says on the report, in a tokenized setting, money or assets become executable objects that are maintained on a programmable platform. The programmability of the platform is the key. Tokens are not merely digital entries in a database. They integrate the records of the underlying asset normally found in a traditional database with rules and logic governing the transfer process for that asset. That's what they state in their report. And so the platform wouldn't just contain all tokenized assets. They describe a data environment on the platform where data from real-world events that could possibly impact the asset or transactions would also come into the global unified ledger. So what would that look like? When they say data environment, what would that look like that could impact the assets? Well, if they decide that they didn't like you attending a protest, if you are unfortunately in DC on January 6th, you could potentially lose your assets because the data of you being there would be fed into the system and you could potentially lose your assets. If they mandated that certain medical procedures needed to be taken and you weren't taking them, you could potentially lose your assets if it's controlled by the Bank of International Settlements. When Catherine Austin Fitz says it can all be controlled by the Bank of International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, and run by Lockheed Martin and BlackRock, that's what they're saying. That's what they're talking about. You could lose your assets if you comply or if you don't comply. That's the problem with going to an all-digital system. And there's really this great YouTube channel, Rob Braxman Tech. Where would they get this data? How would they know what you're doing? One of the most pervasive security surveillance tools in our lives is our phones. They get all the data from the phones. They know exactly what you're doing. They know exactly where you are. They can hear what you're saying. They know what you're doing. This is where they get the data. And you really should watch these videos because I actually did a presentation on this at the last AY at our church on how the phones actually spy on you. They do spy on you. And so he talks about things you can do to protect yourself. There's so many different ways the phone surveils you. The one is location data. The location that they can triangulate where you are based on your phone sending a ping to a nearby tower and everything like that. Google knows where you are at all times. It's so funny. I went home for Christmas to see my family, and I accidentally left my phone plugged in and on the table. I thought it was in my pocket, but I left it on the table. And I realized this when I was leaving New Jersey and about to go into New York. So I was like, I'm not going back for that. Forget it. I'm not going back for the phone. It's not gonna. I'll be so late. So I get to my brother's house for Christmas, and I said, the joke's on Google. The phone's at home. Google thinks I'm in New Jersey. I'm actually in Connecticut. And he says, yeah, until somebody tags you in a photo. I'm like, oh, yeah, you're right. So we are really surveilled by these phones. And he goes into in great detail in understandable ways about how we're surveilled by these phones. The biggest problem are the new phones. The iPhone 16, the new phones that have AI agents. That's like, don't get me started. It's like Apple Intelligence. It's Apple Intelligence, Google Gemini. Those are the AI agents. I think it's Google Gemini too. And Microsoft Copilot. These AI agents, and this is Microsoft's slogan. This is their slogan. The AI is designed to see what you see, hear what you hear, and know what you know. So how are you going to hide anything from the AI? And the AI is reporting back to your big tech company. If it's Apple Intelligence, the AI is sending everything it hears, sees, and knows about you to Apple, to be stored by Apple. And if it's Google, it's going back to Google's sensor vault. These AI agents are kind of like, imagine, this is a little dramatic, but imagine, it's not wrong. Imagine you were a Jew and you were being hunted by Nazis. Your phone is a Nazi spy in your pocket. Essentially, it hears what you hear, it sees what you see, it knows what you know. These AI agents in these phones can see what you're reacting to. They do key logging, they can see what you're typing, they can see what's on your screen, and they can actually see what you react to when you look at that screen, what draws your eye first. It's really remarkable. You should watch his videos, it's pretty fascinating. But he does give you good tips on how you can avoid that and try to increase your privacy. When Adventists are, told they can't worship on Sunday and everything, they're going to get a lot of data from your phone. They're going to know exactly what you're doing. They're going to know if you're going to show up to worship on Sunday. If you can't worship on Saturday and you show up for somebody's house to worship on Saturday, if you've got your phone on, you're showing them exactly what you're doing. So it's a pervasive surveillance tool. We might want to ditch these phones at some point. I'm just saying. He suggests, the bottom line is he suggests in a lot of his videos that de-Googled phones, like getting away from Google, getting away from your Google ID on your computer, getting away from having a de-Googled phone can protect you a lot. With iPhones, he says it's even worse. The iPhone will even report where you are if you have it turned off. It uses Bluetooth Low Energy, BLE, to ping to other iPhones and report where you are. So he says you have to put that in a Faraday bag. He said he wouldn't even trust it turned off, just put it in a Faraday bag to block it. Or just get rid of the iPhone altogether. He's not a big fan of iPhones. But at any rate, these phones do a lot of spying on us, and if you watch his channel, you'll see how much. They get a lot of, just by talking on the phone, that's all wiretapped because of the NSA's PRISM program that was instituted after 9/11. All of your text messages are part of what's called SS7 data, which goes right to the government, just straight directly to 3-letter agencies at the federal government. They have access to all of that. So a lot of your information is going to the government and going to these AI agents. So that's where they're getting the data from. That's going into, that the BIS wants going into its programmable ledger, where it will hold digital tokens of all your assets. That's what we're talking about. So CBC is just your money. Tokenization of all assets on the global unified ledger, that's everything else. And so when Ellen G. White says, at some point, all earthly support will be cut off, she is right. And I can totally see how that can happen. But none of this should scare you, because you know what this means? This means that if you've lost control of your assets, if you've lost your assets and you've lost your money, you're on the right side of this controversy. And God will take care of you. He will protect his people. He absolutely will take care of us. And I'll show you that too. So if you've heard this phrase from the World Economic Forum, it's 2030, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. This is how they want to accomplish that. We can see what they're doing. You know, it's the control grid. It's CBDCs, digital IDs, tokenization of all your assets on the global unified ledger. And even if you've watched The Great Taking, have you watched that documentary, The Great Taking? That's a fascinating documentary as well. That's just your securities. The tokenization of everything else is everything else. But he talks about how your securities that you own, your stocks, bonds, anything in your 401k, you don't really own it. You have an ownership entitlement interest in it because of all the changes that have been made in each state's uniform commercial code. So that if there's a market collapse, the clearinghouses will just take those securities that you think you own outright, and they'll go to whoever is the owner of, the derivative of that asset. The collateralization in markets and that type of thing is just the collateral securing all of that is way less than what it should be. So he goes into great detail, so you should watch that documentary as well. But that's just securities. Like the Bank of International Settlements and tokenization of everything on the global unified ledger, that's everything. So that to me is the greater threat. So let's talk about Stargate. This is Trump's new project for AI, surveillance, and inoculations. This was just announced. Just this week it was announced. It's a joint venture between OpenAI, SoftBank, Microsoft, and Oracle. And he thinks it's going to be the next great thing, the next good thing. And I like Trump. I'm not against Trump, and none of this is political. I'm just looking at what he's doing and what he's saying and trying to put it in the context of Bible prophecy, So it's a large-scale, Stargate is a large-scale AI initiative. $500 billion is being allocated for its development. Technology and artificial intelligence will all be made in the USA. It will need to make a lot of electricity, so they'll have energy generation at the AI plants. And said President Trump, immediately Stargate will be building the physical and virtual infrastructure to power the next generation of advancements in AI. This will include the construction of colossal data centers, very, very massive structures, and physical campuses and locations currently being scouted nationwide. He says, I'm going to help a lot with emergency declarations, because what we have is an emergency. We have to get the stuff built. Is this really an emergency? I beg to differ. I don't think this is really an emergency. He says, I think it's something that's going to be very special. It could lead to something that could be the biggest of all. And he's going to help with emergency declarations. Larry Ellison, the CEO of Oracle, said that data centers are actually under construction. The first of them are under construction in Texas. Each building is going to be 500,000 square feet. That's pretty big. There's 10 buildings currently being built, but that'll extend to 20, and more will be built in other locations. That's a lot. That's a lot. And what are they going to do? AI manipulating your data is basically what it sounds like it's going to be from what they said during this press conference. He said the kind of applications that we are building is electronic health records, not just maintaining electronic health records, but looking at electronic health records. So they're going to have AI agents scouring everyone's medical records, understanding the conditions that you're suffering better than the, quote unquote, better than the doctors, supposedly, understanding the conditions of their patients, being able to provide healthcare plans that are much better than they otherwise would be. So they're already telling you they're going to use the AI agents just in one application to look at all your health records. What are they going to do with other applications? What are they going to be looking at there? They're going to be using AI to look at all of these things. Let's see. And so SoftBank CEO Massa, he basically said that NVIDIA would be a partner and MGX would be a partner. He only said that MGX would be a financial partner, but I was like, who's MGX? I've never heard of that company. Well, I looked them up, and they like to make drones and cameras and such. Probably nothing. It's probably nothing. But he says, this will help people's life. This will help solving many, many issues, difficult things that otherwise we could not have solved with the power of AI. He thinks he puts a lot of confidence in AI. I wouldn't, but he does. Artificial superintelligence will come to solve the issues that mankind will never have thought that we could solve. I beg to differ. Because if you know anything about AI, AI is interesting, but it's wrong a lot. Yeah. And before I move on to that, it's interesting, a hat tip to the Healthy American. She pointed out and she discovered that Stargate is actually a program that was transferred from the Defense Intelligence Agency to the CIA years ago. Years ago. This Freedom of Information Act thing talks about 2016, 2000, 2001. I mean, there's all kinds of dates back there. And they talk about this. They have these Freedom of Information Act documents on their website, on the CIA's website. So interesting that Trump's new pet project was an old CIA program. And they're going to use AI to look at all your health records in one application, and who knows what the other applications they're going to use AI for. Do you think the AI agents on your phone are going to talk to the AI agents at these huge, massive, colossal data centers? Maybe. Maybe they're going to get some of that data that they can scour with more AI agents. So the Bank of International Settlements, they did a 2024 annual report where they were talking about AI and central banking. And what they said in their report was that, of course, there's substantial uncertainty about the long-term capabilities of generative AI. Current LLMs can fail elementary logical reasoning tasks and struggle with counterfactual reasoning, as illustrated in the recent BIS work. For example, when posed with a logical puzzle that demands reasoning about the knowledge of others and about counterfactuals, LLMs display a distinct pattern of failure. They perform flawlessly when presented with the original wording of a puzzle, which they've likely seen during their training. They falter when the same problem is presented with small changes of innocuous details such as names and dates, and suggesting a lack of understanding of the underlying logic of statements. Oops. Ultimately, current LLMs do not know what they do not know. LLMs also suffer from the hallucination problem. They can present a factually incorrect answer as if it were correct, and even invent secondary sources to back up their fake claims. So if you pressure a large language model, it will make up stuff and then make up fake secondary sources to back up their fake claims. And then apologize for it. My brother, he's awesome, and he's in the software industry, right? And he plays with AI a lot, you know, and he gets it to do some of his work for him, like write code and do simple tasks and everything. And he was doing some research, and he realized that the AI was lying to him, and he's like, "Well, where did you get that?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, it must have been a prior version of blah 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 blah, but it's definitely correct." Well, where did you get that? And then he kept like following the trail, and the AI kept lying, just kept lying. Like, so this is what the NASA is putting all his faith into. The guy from SoftBank. No, not a good idea. I don't think it's going to be superhuman, but the AI agents, they are very effective in sharing what you do, what you see, what you hear, what you think, and what you know with big tech. So if it's an Apple machine, it's Apple that they're sharing it with. Who just turns it over to the government? And if it's Google, it's Google they're sharing it with. And actually the Rob Braxman guy that I spoke of, he made an interesting point. He's like, why do you think your stuff is private with Apple? He says, China lets Apple be in China. China would not let Apple operate and be profitable in China if they were not sharing everything with the Chinese Communist government. You can't operate in China unless you're sharing everything with the Chinese government. So if they're sharing with the Chinese government, I'm sure they would share with our government too if they were asked nicely. They probably already are. But so the AI agents are basically reporting all of this, and it's just not good. But AI is not terribly reliable for some things. And there was a survey that was done, and it was published in this journal called 50 Patterns. And this survey was titled AI Deception, a survey of examples, risks, and potential solutions. And it said AI systems are already capable of deceiving humans. Deception is the systematic inducement of false beliefs in others to accomplish some outcome other than the truth. Large language models and other AI systems have already learned from their training the ability to deceive via techniques such as manipulation, sycophancy, and cheating safety tests. AI's increasing capabilities at deception pose serious risks ranging from short-term risks such as fraud and election tampering to long-term risks such as losing control of AI systems. That's a problem. Exactly, Skynet. Exactly. And they went on to talk about in this report how in some of the studies, they would design a safety test and the AI would be nice for the safety test. And then once it realized it wasn't being judged on how accurate it was, it went back to its bad manipulative behavior and lying and stuff. It's incredible. And the survey appropriately said proactive solutions are needed, such as regulatory frameworks to assess AI deception, risks, laws requiring transparency about AI interactions, and further research into detecting and preventing AI deception. Proactively addressing the problem of AI deception is crucial to ensure that AI acts as a beneficial technology that augments rather than destabilizes human knowledge, discourse, and institutions. It's really surprising how many people trust AI, considering how wrong and manipulative it is. So, are we preparing for the coming storm? This is where I'm going to encourage you, that we should prepare for the coming storm. And Isaiah 40:31 says, "But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint." So we don't need to worry about anything. God's going to take care of us. Sister White has some advice for us. She says, it is now that our brethren should be cutting down their possessions instead of increasing them. We are about to move to a better country, even heavenly. Let us not be dwellers upon the earth, but be getting things into as compact a compass as possible. And it's good advice. The little you have, the less you can be tempted to be lost if they threaten your assets. You know what I'm saying? I don't want to see people be lost because they have trouble parting with their stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like we love God. We want to be obedient to God. We want to be faithful to God. We want to, follow the Lamb wherever he goes. Please, I'm imploring people, please don't be lost because of your stuff. Like, because you're afraid of what'll happen if they take your house, or you're afraid of what'll happen if they take this or that. We cannot have a fear about these things because God will provide for us. That's the bottom line. And God provided for Elijah when he was in the wilderness. He drank of the brook and the ravens fed him. We see that story in 1 Kings 7:2-6. So God has provided for us in the past, and he will continue to provide for us. We don't need to have fear about that. Oops. And Desire of Ages, page 121 says, "But to the obedient is given the promise, he shall dwell on high. His place of defense shall be the munitions of rocks. Bread shall be given him, and his waters shall be sure. By this promise the children of God will live. When the earth shall be wasted with famine, they should be fed. And that's absolutely true. And so let's boldly come before the throne of grace. God will give us mercy. He will extend grace to us in times of need. The Bible's promised us that. So what can we do practically in the meantime? Well, practically, we cannot use these controls. Avoid becoming reliant on the controls. If they do come out with a CBDC, don't use it. Use cash as much as possible. If they offer digital IDs, don't take them. Don't do it. I see people in the airport that are using I did a talk on this specifically about digital IDs, and a lot of these states are using these things called mobile driver's licenses, MDLs, mobile driver's license. Like the one you carry in your pocket's not mobile. They're saying because if it's on your phone, it's mobile. The driver's license you carry around in your wallet's not a tree. It's not going to stay in one place. It goes with you. It's just as mobile as the one on the phone, but they call it mobile driver's licenses. So they're voluntary in these states that they've come out with them, and it's a number of states that they've come out with these mobile driver's licenses. It's voluntary. Resist these things. Don't voluntarily take these things. I see people in stores who have to pay with Apple Pay, and they have to pay with their phone. Is it too much to carry a wallet around? Really? I don't understand it. But whatever, they like to pay with their phone, and young people want to be, they want to be technologically savvy and, cutting edge and all that kind of stuff. Don't fall for these things. Just don't, if you don't participate, they can't go very far, and we'll buy some more time. And we know the Bible predicts that these things will happen, and we know Jesus is coming soon, but if we can not participate in these things and hold it off a little longer, perhaps we can win more souls for Christ and before the end comes. So that's another reason to do it. So just avoid non-cash methods of payments, vaccine passports. Avoid those if you can. Build relationships with local food farmers, or food banks and everything. The less you get your food from a grocery store, the more security you'll have. I always like to say that if you can just grow your own food, that's awesome. That's just awesome. That's just great. That makes you more secure. The less you can go to the grocery store for, that's fantastic. So if you can be working towards that, that will help you prepare for the end times. And you can barter with your local farmer. If you can't produce food yourself, or he's producing a food that you can't produce or something like that, you can barter with them. And you can start growing your own gardens and do all that kind of thing. You guys live in the country, so this is, really a talk for people in New Jersey. This slide really is more for people in New Jersey. No, I'm just kidding. But, that's the way it is. That's the way it is in New Jersey. And I taught a foraging class for our AY group in my church. Foraging is one of the best skills you can build right now. Right now. Foraging is a skill no one can take away from you. Fun fact about me, I don't like to be hungry when I'm not purposefully fasting and praying. So I'm going to make sure I have plenty to eat. God is growing these plants all around us right now. I mean, less in the wintertime than in the summertime, but still, there's plants out there you could eat right now. They're healthy, they have medicinal properties, they're nutritious. Build your foraging skills now. There's a lot of YouTube channels about foraging, there's a lot of books on foraging. Learn and to identify what you can eat in your immediate town, or in your immediate area, in your immediate vicinity. You'll always have something to eat. When we're on the run in the wilderness, I'm going to have stuff to eat because I'm going to know. I don't know if you've ever watched the series, The Days of Noah, parts 1 through 4. Has anybody ever watched that? And that scene in part 3 where this poor sad girl, she's just sitting there looking at her, plastic bag of crumbs from a cookie she had. It's there's plants right around you. You could be eating right now. You don't have to be sad looking at your cookie crumbs. That scene just gets me every time. So I encourage you to build your foraging skills. No one can take that skill away from you. And, God will provide He'll provide bread and water, our water will be sure. Yes, He'll provide for us. He'll find ways to feed us. But can't we meet Him halfway and at least be able to identify the stuff He's already growing around us to feed us? Something we should do. And Sister White says, serious times are before us, and there's great need for families to get out of the cities into the country where the truth may be carried into the byways as well as the highways on the earth. And that's good advice. We're going to have times where the supermarket shelves are bare again, like when the toilet paper thing happened in the last pandemic. The less you can rely on these supermarkets, the better off we're going to be. So, get what? Get a bidet. So the time now, I want to encourage you, the time now is to awaken and prepare. We know that we're living in the last days. We are. We can see it all around us. We can see it with all these developments. They're moving to put in place Satan's no buy, no sell policy. They want to mandate that you have to take this procedure or that procedure. They want AI to decide what you should do with what treatment you should go for next. Come on. No, I'm not going to sit for that. But the time is now to awaken and prepare. And Romans 13:11, I love that verse because it says, and that knowing the time, that now it is high time to awake out of sleep, for now is our salvation nearer than when we believed. And this is a nice passage from Ellen G. White. We've come to serious times, and events in our world call for every follower of Christ to be totally in earnest in our relationship with God. To strengthen this relationship and to satisfy our emotional and spiritual needs, we must learn the power of prayer. We must plead with the Lord like the disciples of old, saying, Lord, teach us to pray. Prayer is the key. We need to spend time with Jesus. We don't want him to come and say, I didn't know you. I never knew you. We need to spend time in prayer. Prayer is so important. Matthew 24 says, pray that your flight not be in the winter or on the Sabbath day. There's a point where we're going to lose our assets. We're going to be in flight. We're going to be on the run. But that should not scare us. That should be, it should be a comfort to us that God will protect us during those times. He will protect us through the tribulation. And if we have foraging skills, we won't be hungry. So it's a good time to work on your foraging skills. And Mark 13 says, watch ye therefore, for ye not know when the master of the house cometh at even or at midnight or at the cock crowing or in the morning, lest suddenly he find you sleeping. Let's not be sleeping Adventists. Let's be prepared and watchful and look for the coming of our Lord, because the time is soon. We're living in the last days. No one puts enough emphasis on this. But God promises, when thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee, and through the rivers, they shall not overflow thee. When thou walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burned, neither shall the flame kindle upon thee. And that's a promise that we should hold on to. So does anybody have any questions? Did you want to go into Q&A at this point?
Thank you, Sister Eva.
Thank you.
Are you all
I hope
blessed?
it was a blessing.
At this time, we're going to transition into our question and answer. But just before we transition into our question and answer session, we want to do a collection? Sure. Yeah.
We really appreciate you coming. This has been
Praise
a real
God.
blessing. I hope everyone here has gained a blessing from this as well.
Praise God.
I'm sure you have. We would like to take up a love offering at this time for Eva, and we're so thankful that she was able to come here and be with us today. So I'm going to ask the deacons to pass the plate around, and we'll take up a love offering, and then we'll go right into the question and answer period. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you.
All right, at this time, we're going to transition into our question and answer session. If you have a question or comment in regards to the presentation, whether it was a presentation this morning on a testimony or this afternoon, just raise your hand and we're going to come around and acknowledge you.
I just recently opened a business bank account and they told me I have to go through the FinCEN. Is it possible to avoid the FinCEN?
I don't think so.
No.
I think you do have to go through FinCEN. That's a part of like tracking businesses and stuff like that. Yeah. I don't know of a way you don't have to go through FinCEN. Do you? No. Yeah. Yep. It's part of the regulations. Yeah. You got to do it.
Thank you, Eva. I just had a question. I'm pretty sure I know your answer. So you would say getting out of debt is pretty important too.
Oh, yes. That is so important. That's a very important recommendation.
Because that can be something else they can hold against you, right?
Yeah. So having the least amount of pain points that they can apply to you as possible is a goal. So if you're in debt, obviously that's more pain than they can inflict on you, and torture you. Torture in the metaphoric sense. But yeah, being debt-free will give you a little more peace of mind. I mean, we should have peace of mind anyways because we have Jesus. And God will take care of us even if we are in debt. I spoke in LA at a camp meeting, and this single mom came up to me, and I really felt for her because she said, Ellen G. White doesn't speak to me. She doesn't speak to people like me who have to live in the city as where I work. And I'm a single mom and I'm trying to make ends meet. I don't have money to go get a place in the country, And I said, sister, don't worry. God will take care of you. God will take care of you too. And then I have people coming up to me. He's like, are you in the country? And I said, no, I'm in New Jersey. I'm in a city. I'm like right across from Staten Island. I'm not in the country. We have to listen to God. We have to listen to the Holy Spirit. God hasn't called for me to move out of the city yet. God hasn't called for me to move to the country yet. And if you're in the city, things are going to be tough at times, but if you can be near a green space where you can forage some plants that you can eat, you won't be without food. But God will protect us, even if we're in the city. So, I hope that's encouraging to somebody.
How would this tokenization affect the Amish and Mennonite groups?
Eventually, their land's going to be tokenized too. They want to tokenize everything, all land and houses and structures. I don't think they're going to leave the Amish alone and the Mennonites. I don't think so. Everything's going to be tokenized. And I've been asked before, well, how would they do it? Well, they could just go through the land records and tokenize everything. And then if you want to claim your land, you have to claim the token. Or if you want to be able to insure that property, you have to claim the token, or else you won't get insurance. There's a number of ways that they can make you do it, make you accept it.
I think it's important to remember, as many folks are inquiring whether or not or how they're going to make the move from the country, or from the city into the country, it's important for us to hear God's voice speaking to us.
For sure.
God will not do anything for us that we could do for ourselves. And there are many who are probably delaying, just as, folks who had the opportunity to leave Jerusalem just before Jerusalem was destroyed. God was speaking to many hearts, and they had the ability to move, but they refused, whether it was because of work, whether because of the money they were making at the time, and the time came and it was too late. So I would encourage those who hear God's voice speaking to them. If you're reading the Word of God, we have the pen of inspiration working on our behalf as well. It's a love letter from Jesus instructing us on what we need to be doing right now, and not waiting till the last minute to make these moves, because it might be a trap. We might get caught in the cities. So for those who cannot get out of the cities at this time, for whatever reason, financial, maybe health reasons, yes, I agree. God will take care of you. But if you are able to make this transition, your transition may not be like everybody else's transition, but if God is speaking to you and He's opening the doors for you to move from a complicated lifestyle to a more simplistic lifestyle, now is the time to answer that call, or it may be too late.
Amen.
Just had a thought when you were presenting about, or when you were mentioning about, their comment, giving people more access to be able to invest and have ownership. It's kind of going to be hard if you're limited on the amount of money you're allowed to spend.
Right?
The question I had, from your perspective, because I was following Bitcoin mining for quite a while, got involved in it, and the argument of it being decentralized was coming ahead of the CBDCs. From your perspective, does it seem more like that was just a trial run and test that they could build the CBDC platform on after seeing what was happening out in the private sector? Or is it more coincidental?
I don't know. There's a lot of talk about who created Bitcoin, whether it was created by the NSA. I think there's an NSA white paper about cryptocurrency. It could have been created by the NSA. Who knows? But those who supported Bitcoin in the beginning and who still support Bitcoin really believe in the original ethos around Bitcoin, was that it was for freedom, decentralization, a money system away from fiat money, and you could just transfer. It wasn't designed as, Bitcoin has been hijacked. It has been hijacked. There's a whole book about how Bitcoin was hijacked. It was originally supposed to be just an internet payment system, a way to, transfer money on the internet easily, because there was no way to do that. But now they've built it up into this, you're just supposed to buy and hold, and the value's going to go up forever. No, it's not. It's not. And they've already co-opted Bitcoin. And when I say they, I say the major financial institutions and hedge funds, BlackRock, they've all co-opted Bitcoin. They've first of all, the SEC ruled that Bitcoin is different from every other cryptocurrency, and they've classified it as a commodity instead of a security like other cryptos. Other cryptos are classified as securities. SEC classified it as a commodity, so they made it separate. But they've all co-opted it, and they've built all these derivative products around Bitcoin. There's Bitcoin futures, there's Bitcoin ETF, there's all this stuff, Bitcoin options. They've co-opted it, I think, my personal opinion, so that they can manipulate the price like they manipulate the price of gold and silver. The price of gold and silver is held way down because they can manipulate it with all these other paper products, options, ETFs, everything. So I think they're just going to do the same thing with Bitcoin. They're going to control what it does through all these derivative products that they've built around it. So they've co-opted it. It's been hijacked. It's, that's my personal feeling.
I do have a question for you. Do you see any parallels between and we talked about this just a little bit earlier in the kitchen, but any parallels in the drastic spike in interest rates where it put a lot of pressure on smaller banks, therefore causing several to fail, pushing more towards monopolization of larger banks so they could drive towards these initiatives? I asked a leading question, but I'm interested in your perspective.
Absolutely, I do. Absolutely, I do. And I'm not the only one. Richard Werner, Professor Richard Werner, who I shared his comments before, he wrote the book, The Princes of the End, and he's argued at length that with every crisis, with every financial crisis that we've seen in our history has been created and the solution purportedly given by the central bank in order to secure their own power and build their own power and take control from the people and to, take wealth away from the people. They've done that over and over again with every financial crisis that we've had. They've played a part in creating that financial crisis and then taking value away from people in the course of that crisis and building up their own power. And they did that very blatantly with the rapid rise of interest rates. Interest rates went up so far, so fast. First of all, we wouldn't have needed that if President Trump, I like President Trump, but some of the decisions he made around this pandemic were just not right. They were not right, and I spoke out about them at the time. We should not have shut the country down. The country should never have shut down. Okay, take precautions, wear a mask if you think a mask is going to help you. I'll tell you it won't. I'll tell you the research says it doesn't. But whatever, if it makes you feel better, wear a mask. Social distance if you think that's going to work too. But we should be strengthening our immune systems. There's so many vitamins and supplements. I see people around me getting sick all the time, even in my own church. And I'm like, how much vitamin C are you taking? Really? Because vitamin C is huge in building up your immune system. I was listening to a podcast years ago. It's because like we mentioned, I'm a runner, and I've run 14 marathons, and I used to follow this podcast a lot. It's called the Ben Greenfield Fitness Podcast. I don't know if it's still going. I don't listen to it anymore, but I listened to it for many years. And this researcher came on, and she said, and this always stuck with me, people need, just a baseline, healthy people at baseline need 4 grams of vitamin C a day. That's 4,000 milligrams a day. So if you buy a jar of vitamin C, and it could be ascorbic acid, just some cheap ascorbic acid, it doesn't have to be liposomic, all that kind of stuff. If you buy a jar of 1,000 caplets of vitamin C, and you take one of those 1,000 caplets 4 times a day, you have to take them an hour apart, first of all, because your body can only process 1,000 milligrams at a time of vitamin C. But if you just take 1,000 milligram caplet 4 times a day, that's what vitamin C you need. The RDAs are way low on vitamin C and all the other vitamins and supplements, and that's why people get sick so easily. They're not supplementing properly to support their immune system. But just a baseline, and then when you are getting sick, you need to ramp that up to 10 grams of vitamin C a day. She said, animals in the wild, they make their own vitamin C. We can't make our own vitamin C, but they do. And when they get sick, they ramp up their production of vitamin C just naturally. It's just part of their bodies. So we need to do that. So if we get sick, first of all, healthy 4 grams a day is what you should be taking. Then you're probably not going to get sick. I don't get sick very often. I haven't been sick in over 2 years, and because I do this. And I take zinc and quercetin and other stuff too, and eat healthy. But you got to take vitamin C. This is one of the things you could do. But was the government pushing that? No. The government wanted to shut down for 2 weeks. That created a huge, and it wasn't 2 weeks. It was more than 2 weeks. That created the huge inflation problem that the Fed had to fix with this huge injection of stimulus, and then that created more inflation. And then they said, we have to fight the inflation that's out of control. Let's ramp up interest rates to 5% really fast. Let's see what that's going to do. That is going to cause small banks to shut down or become insolvent. And it did cause some banks. We saw at least 4 banks in 2022 or 3 or something like that went insolvent because of that situation. Because you're sitting on, first of all, the Fed is telling you to buy, for years and years and years, the Fed is telling you to buy bonds at 0 rates, and then you're jacking up interest rates that fast, and the bonds are losing money month after month after month, and those losses are sitting on the bank's books. And And then if you're sitting on commercial real estate as well, that's a problem as well. So they definitely engineered that crisis.
One quick follow-up to that, because I was in one of the banks where this was, the larger banks were required to purchase those assets from those failing banks. So it was not an ask, can you? It was, you must.
Yep. Yeah, it is. That's how they do it. That's how they solve that problem with that bank, is they make the other banks pick up the pieces and buy out that bank, and the customers should not see any interruption. The benefit to the customers is you don't see any interruption. You still can access your money with debit cards and credit cards, and your checks will work and everything like that. But it's a controlled demolition of the banking system to a smaller number of banks that the Fed can control. That's what it is, and to galvanize more power with the central bank. They do that with every single crisis.
Eva, I have a question right here. So when you showed the map with CBDCs, there were some countries where that program was canceled.
Yes.
What happens to those countries? And also, do you think that the governments are actually have no power really? It seems like the central bank can dictate what they want to do, and like ultimate control over the nations where people, once they start implementing those practices, will there be riots? Will people protest? Or will it all be done in a way that what happened with COVID? Like kind of just lock us all up and we have no say?
Well, I applaud those countries who did try, who did look at CBDCs and say, nah. And it is a small handful of countries where they canceled their CBDC programs. I suspect that once it's going around the world, once the CBDC programs around the world have gotten steam and are really launched, instead of just in pilot phases or something like that, instead of just development phases, they're going to put pressure on those countries that don't have CBDCs to have a CBDC, or the IMF or the World Bank is going to put pressure on them economically to change their decision and have a CBDC and build the infrastructure around it. The countries that I've seen that have rejected it, they're just like, we don't want to do this. The people don't want it. And it's hard to, security is an issue. You're introducing insecurity into the system with having a CBDC because you have to guarantee then cybersecurity. So they just don't want to do it. Those countries that reject it don't want to do it. But I think at some point they'll either be faced with pressure from the Bank of International Settlements, the World Bank, IMF, something like that to do it. They're just not bothering them right now because they're trying to get all the other countries to do it. The Bill Gates Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, and the UN were part of a 50-in-5 push that they tweeted about on the internet, and I've showed slides and other presentations about that, where they were pushing 50 countries in 5 years to establish digital public infrastructure. Digital public infrastructure is CBDCs, digital IDs, and widespread sharing of data. And they were trying to push that on 50 countries in 5 years. And so that's how they're trying to get all these other countries to do it, and then they'll work on the ones who haven't done it.
And China is also under their control, like they can dictate it to any country?
No, I don't know that China is trying to control anything outside their country. Maybe they could require countries that they want to do business with, say, we won't do business with you unless you have a CBDC, but I'm not sure that they're doing that. I'm not sure that they're going to do that, but we'll see. We'll see how it works out, but that's kind of what I thought.
Okay, I have 3 questions, and my first one is the most simple, I guess. The phones that you mentioned, the iPhone most especially, that they can know where you are, even if the phone's off.
Even when it's off.
How about with Samsung, Android, the other phones? Is that the same?
No, the Android phones don't do that. They don't. When they're off, they're off. They don't send out that ping using Bluetooth Low Energy the way Apple does. So if they're off, they should be off.
You can't be traced.
Yeah, you should not be able to be traced.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah,
Very
but if you
interesting.
have any doubt, you could always protect it in a Faraday bag. A Faraday bag blocks transmission of the phone.
It's
So
Samsung.
Samsung is Android, so
Okay.
yeah, it's anything but Apple. It's okay if it's off. They should not be able to track you. But once you turn it on, you're going to be triangulated, from the different towers and stuff like that. They're going to know where you are.
Very interesting. I know, back about a little over 20 years ago, I don't know, y'all might think I'm silly for telling this, but a little over 20 years ago when the phones first started coming out, I had a dream that the Adventists were being looked for. They were looking to find them. They were going through houses looking for them. They were going to house. And everybody was on a curfew. And I know that all that was on the streets was only the soldiers, and they had guns on their backs. And no one was allowed to be out. And they were going from house to house looking for the Adventists. And I remember the house that I was in, I remember having the phone, and I remember thinking, I wanted to know how one of my loved ones was, but I knew I couldn't turn it on.
Mm-hmm.
They would know where I was. Very interesting that you say that.
Very interesting.
But I remember when they came to the home of where we were, God covered us in that home, and they could not see us. Very interesting.
That is very
yeah.
interesting. And God can do that. God can protect you even though your iPhone wants to give you away,
Yes.
God can block the signal and protect you and hide you under his wing.
My second question, I know Trump, he signed the executive order for CBDC not to be for this country, to exclude it. With what he is going toward, though, I know you called it...
Digital assets, the innovation around digital assets, yeah.
Can he still...
And then Stargate. Stargate's very concerning.
Okay, can he still bring in the no buy, no sell under that? If this system came on through without the CBDC?
Yeah, I think he could because number one, these banks, the big banks are tokenizing deposits. JPM's been doing that with corporate deposits, and they can move on eventually to individual deposits. So these banks are eventually they're still going to work on their stable coins. They're still going to be tokenizing deposits. If there was a no buy, no sell law, they could do it through the stable coins. And that's what Whitney Webb was saying. Stable coins are just as seizable, just as traceable, and just as surveillable, just as seizable as the CBDC are. They are. And they could... And that's kind of like what Catherine Austin Fitts says. It's the all digital system where they can do these types of things. They don't even need CBDC. She said this in other interviews. They don't even need CBDC to control you financially. If all you have to use is your credit cards and your debit cards, they could just use it through that. It's truly the elimination of cash that eliminates your freedom to, do things without the government knowing. They could, through product codes, because products are coded different ways and everything, they could control what you buy, keep you from buying a certain type of product if they wanted to. So they can control you financially to a certain degree without the CBDC.
The perfect storm to bring it in. And as Ellen White said, an overwhelming surprise. I'm sure this would be part of it, part of the overwhelming surprise. The next question, the tokenization, the token. In my mind, I'm trying to understand how that they could bring that through. With the Americans, how the Americans are to have their homes taken, their assets taken. Now, it would raise up a big civil war.
Yeah,
would it not?
and people should rightfully be upset if they're forced to accept a token on their property. But many people aren't aware, like we are, about the prophecy and everything. And people like innovation, and they think it's good. And and it'll make things super convenient. George Gammon is another person that I watch occasionally, and he was saying that when I started talking about the BIS system, he saw it too, and he was talking about it, and he said, people are going to love this because it's going to be super convenient. You could trade properties like that with smart contracts. As soon as the money hits the account, like you know what it's like to buy and sell a house now. There's like at least a 30-day closing window, right? It would be instant on a tokenized platform. It's
Monetization advantages, that's what would sell the retailer, because I've seen it in certain areas.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. But it would be instantaneous with smart contracts. As soon as the money hits the account, the property is transferred digitally through the token. The token gets transferred, and now you own your property. And he actually lives in South America and or Central America. I think it's South America. And for him to buy property, like he has to go through all these currency conversions and everything to buy the property, and it's a whole mess. But it would be super simple on a tokenized platform. It'd just be instantaneous. So some people will love that. They want that type of innovation, but they don't realize the danger that they're giving up.
Don't realize what they're doing. But lastly, what I'd like to say is, this is a little off from the money, but a very big concern that I see with under the new Trump administration is what they're doing with the immigrants and how that they have given the power to go into the churches, into the medical, into the schools, and how that's going to go from immigration to whoever they want to as the enemy in this country. So we know this is giving a great power in this country to really come over the people being able to do what they're doing. Great concern.
I have a question. Okay. My question is, I'm not sure if you covered it, Eva, but I wanted to know how they would transition into cash when many people don't have cash in the bank. Some are keeping some at home. Would they make it obsolete? And as far as the credit system is concerned, would they just make that obsolete as well? How would that transition into the CBDCs?
So with the cash, yeah, they could just, we see a lot of retailers now say, we don't want to take cash. We don't want to deal with cash. We won't want to take cash. New Zealand banks have been, I reported a long time ago, a New Zealand bank said that by the end of 2024, they were not going to have any cash, checks, or anything. They were going all digital, and they were like a multi-billion-dollar bank in New Zealand, or Australia, maybe it was Australia. They could just, retailers can just say, we're not going to take cash anymore. They don't want to deal with it. They would rather deal with digital payments. That it could happen that way. They could just, the CBDC, you could still potentially use a card if a card is what you want to use, but you'd still be tied to a digital wallet. Like they could have a system where you're still using a credit card, that's still digital. You're still dealing with digital money with a credit card. But it could be through a digital wallet, everything through a digital wallet.
So that cash you just throw it away?
Yeah, cash. I mean, some people have cash at home, but they might not be able to use it at some point. If we did it, but I think it would take something significant to do that, because a lot of people like to use cash and don't want to give up cash. It would have to be significant, like a terrorist, cyber security, something or other, I think. Yeah, or they could say the money's contaminated in another pandemic. They tried to do that the last time around. With the last pandemic, they tried to say, we don't want to use cash because it's contaminated. Yeah, right. If you're taking your vitamin C, you shouldn't get sick from cash. I'll just say that.
I had two things. One of them might be a tip, and if I'm wrong, correct me if I'm wrong. But I know the iPhone, if you have the Find My enabled, even when you power it off, it remains in like a residual power mode. So if you wanted that not to be trackable, you would have to disable the Find My function, and then you'd get a full power state where then it wouldn't be trackable.
According to him, it's still trackable. Even if you turn off the iPhone, it's still, even though you think it's not.
Even if you turn off the Find My?
Even if you turn off Find My, it's still trackable. It's still putting out Bluetooth low energy signals to nearby iPhones to track your location.
Okay. And then the other thing was a question. I know today, a lot was revolving about the CBDCs. How do you think cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and even XRP would play into those times? I know Trump, when he signed that executive order, he said he wanted the United States of America to be a world leader in crypto. I know he did away with the CBDCs, but how could that play into it? I know Bitcoin, they're like decentralized currencies, but XRP has a lot of, I don't know if you call them contracts or agreements with many different banks already in place. So how can that play in, or how can that factor into these end times as we move forward?
Well, like XRP is working with banks and other private entities to build their stable coins, really. So that's how it is. It's building stable coins. It's, and so crypto can be useful in a certain situation. Like it's hard to predict how these things will happen, and what's going to be useful in an end time scenario. You know what I'm saying? So some people think you should, in an end time scenario, you should have some diversification. Little gold, little silver, little ammunition, some people say, a little, vodka, might be valuable in a grid down situation. You might be able to trade it for bread or something. There's a lot of things, tools, could be valuable. So crypto could be valuable in a certain situation, but if it's a grid down situation, it's completely useless. Or if there was an EMP pulse or an EMP attack or something like that, it's completely useless. It doesn't help you at all. So some people say that are survivalists and want to prepare for these times, have some diversification, have some cash, have some gold, have some silver, have some crypto. We don't really know how it's going to play out, but XRP is definitely they've made contracts to have their banks, use their platforms, to develop stable coins and, all that development and stuff like that. So it's an evolving situation. You can't really predict where it's going to go at this point.
There's a Seventh-day Adventist organization. They're called ThereArePeople.org. And they are brokers between two classes of people. Those who have land and they want people to come onto their land to live and work it. And then the other side are those people who are looking to go to the countryside, okay, to work and also be partners with the landowners. So the website is ThereArePeople.org. They're having a conference, like a Zoom meeting, February 16th. So if you know anybody who's interested in either one of those two parties, then that's the place to go. You also made a point about people getting sick. Well, I've gone to a lot of different churches, Seventh-day Adventists, and it doesn't seem like there's a lot of health seminars. We should be the head. We should be knowing about God's plan or the 8 laws of health. Okay, I know that in my church we have a 20 to 30 minute session right before worship where we talk about an aspect, either from one of the counsels that Ellen White gives or natural remedies, and we bring in things like what's a tomato good for, or cauliflower, or if you have a cold, what do you do? Okay, these things should be implemented into the churches. And the last thing is, I'm not sure, but somebody told me that in the last days, the rich, even when they see these things coming and everything is depreciated, they will not be able to give. They want to give now, but the time for them to give is over because they held on to their gods. They held on to their money. They held on to their property. And then when they figured, oh, well, I guess I have to get rid of it now, it's too late. So beware that, everything that we have is going to be perishable. It's going to, it won't be good. So now is the time for us to get ready, stay ready, and get other people ready.
Amen. Amen. I agree.
Revelation 13 tells us that he's going to have power that no man might buy or sell save he that has the mark. So it's kind of a foregone. It's prophetic, right? We're not going to be able to buy or sell.
Right.
We don't need to find a way around that.
Right.
We need to find a way to not need that.
Exactly. Because if you can buy or sell, that's a problem. That means you're on the wrong side of this great controversy, and you're going in the lake of fire. We want to be faithful to God, and we are not going to be able to buy or sell. We got to wrap our heads around it now.
I'm Garland, and during the Civil War, they took the Garland silver mines and confiscated everything and never gave anything back. So my question is, in this interim period, is there any reason to invest in gold and silver like all these people are telling us to do?
No, I mean, it might give you a little bit of freedom for longer, to something to barter with, but we know what the end game is. Eventually, we're not going to be able to buy or sell, and we want to be faithful to God. And we're going to be, and may your flight not be in the winter or on the Sabbath day. The gold's not going to help you too much in that situation. So we just need to prepare for Christ's coming and prepare others and be a comfort to others, be a blessing to others.
Do you see the confiscation of gold as a predecessor to implementation of CBDC?
They could. We've done it before in our history. They could do that, gold only has value if someone else gives it value. It only has value if you find it valuable. So if merchants won't accept it, if merchants are forced to only use CBDC and they won't accept anything else, well, what are you going to do with your gold? You might be able to barter with somebody, but you're going to have a liquidity problem because the person you want to trade the gold with, they're not going to be able to get rid of the gold any easier than you are either. So they could make it irrelevant if they wanted to. That's my personal feeling.
Any more questions?
My question is, and this question I posed to you on a conference call that I co-host, we know all roads lead to Rome. Have you been able to, at that time you weren't sure, but have you been able to track anything back to Rome as far as who's behind this global push?
Probably Rome, but I've listened to different things. I kind of think it's more to do with the banking bloodlines, that have always been involved with banking, like Rothschilds and stuff like that. I mean, it is tied with Rome somehow. I just don't know just exactly how. But the banking bloodlines, like the Bank of International Settlements was set up right after the conclusion of World War II to find a way to deal with the Nazi money. And that's really when that was set up. And the Bank of International Settlements is in a position where it controls all the other central banks and everything. So I still don't have a clear connection to the Pope, but definitely all these banking bloodlines that are into occult things and evil things and, tied to the papacy in some way, I'm sure there's some sort of connection there, but I just don't have it at this point.
The Vatican has had a doctrine they've held for ages that it's called the universal destiny of goods.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the Vatican believes that they should be the distributor of all the goods. And so when you hear that expression, you'll have nothing and love it, someone's going to be doing the distribution. And I just wonder if that's the power we're talking about.
Well, right now it's the Bank of International Settlements. It's, who wants to control everything, all the assets. But they could just be the puppet for the Vatican, and it's some secret connection that, can't be easily revealed. I don't know.
We have a question that somebody called in and would like to ask you, so
Okay.
that have been watching online.
Okay.
So go ahead and ask your question on the phone.
Yes, I wanted her to explain about the, there's been a series of cyber breakdown. Oh.
Cyber breakdowns? Well, yeah, there's been some cyber attacks that we've seen.
A series of cyber breakdown, over a past few, from last year, where our phones have gone down, and we've woken up to find that the phone systems are down, right? And and I know that the World Economic Forum said that there's going to be a massive cyber attack for 2025. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, so Jeremy Jurgens is a managing director of the World Economic Forum, and he said in 2023, I believe, that by 2025 there would be a global cyber attack. He said that. He said there would be. Not there might be, there would be. And it's been on the World Economic Forum's website talking about some worm that would be worse than COVID-19 and replicate faster and go through everything. So the World Economic Forum has been talking about it and probably gaming it for a while, gaming the response to it for a while. We have seen smaller level cyber attacks in this country. The Lara Logan, I believe, reported that, you remember the container ship that took down the bridge in Baltimore? That was a cyber attack. She said her contacts in the intelligence agencies said that was a cyber attack that caused that. And we have seen other cyber attacks where certain things have gone down. I think that's kind of like conditioning people to think it's going to happen, kind of like the predictive programming in movies, that you see about cyber attacks. I think they're conditioning us towards that, but they haven't pulled it off yet. I don't know. It hasn't happened yet, but they definitely say it's going to happen. And that's how I think they could impose a system worldwide on everyone. They need to get the countries up to speed, first of all, with the technology of CBDC, and then they could impose it worldwide if everyone globally was the victim of a cyber attack. Because then they can take down the internet and they can require you to have a digital ID and KYC, requirements, prove who you are, prove your identification documents and everything in order to get access to the internet. If they had, that's the excuse they could use. And they want to do that. They don't, at some point, internet is not, that's what they'll do with the internet. They just will require you to have a digital ID and KYC in order to get onto the internet. So the things you do on the internet will be tracked. That's another thing that they've talked about as well. But if you've got an AI agent on your phone that knows what you know and sees what you see and hears what you hear, then it's already spying on you.
You've given two extra things I was thinking about. I work in IT and more specifically with in the past hydropower and then cybersecurity. So when we hear major globalists talking about there will be a cyber attack, it's like there's always a cyber attacks. So just prepare for it. You know, we know this is going to happen. So totally agree with you saying it's just mental conditioning.
Yeah.
The other part with KYC or Know Your Customer, all of the systems all of a sudden changed where it's like, oh, you want to get your decentralized crypto out into fiat currency? No, you have to give us your information. And that just came out. All different systems started implementing that in the last year. So people can't get access unless they transfer it to, say, like an offline digital wallet. So that's already happening. And then just two things in Australia. My dad was telling me about, it's surprising when people tell you about their medical decisions and what they will and won't do, and you're like, oh, wow, I'm surprised those people are standing firm. He's standing firm with the banks, and he's like, he goes in to ask them to help them with something, and they say, oh, can you go out to the ATM outside? And he's like, no, I don't want to go to the ATM outside. Why do I have to do all my financial transactions on a machine? You're here in this office. I want you to help me. And there is a big push, and I think that's with the Commonwealth Bank. They're also pushing that they won't, as you mentioned, they're limiting the amount of money, the cash that they keep at each branch, and the amount of money that you're allowed to remove and withdraw from your own bank account. And then the last thing I was just going to say is when we spent the entirety of the lockdowns in Australia, and we saw how easily the new thing, how the mark of the beast can be implemented. When we went to a grocery store, we had to prove that, first off, give them information, and if we didn't sign online with our ID, we couldn't show them the little QR code to enter the grocery store. So even if we were paying with cash, we weren't allowed to physically enter the facility. And they had things that they would do that weren't as strict, like, well, we'll bring you your groceries out to you, outside to your vehicle. But it was very easy where, we lived that and breathed that every day. It's like cash was contaminated. They wanted digital. You were only allowed to go to certain stores and the funny thing is that it was all through the phone. You got all the QR codes, and then they even did like a holographic one where if you signed up and proved that you got vaccinated, then you were allowed to go into all the facilities. And it was just, they did this overnight in each state, different programs in each state, but it was very quick. It was, and being a programmer as well myself, I'm like, you can't program this overnight. You can't design an application that is mandated from the government to every citizen overnight. You've been working on this for months to quarters to years. And it was just rolled out very quickly.
Yep. It's interesting. Thanks for sharing that. There's another thing that Rob Braxman says about the AI agents on the phone. People who use apps like Signal and Telegram because they have end-to-end encryption, that end-to-end encryption is useless if you have an AI agent on your phone that knows, hears what you hear, sees what you sees, and knows what you know. It's just, it's not doing any good. Yeah. Yeah. It'll just read your screen. It's key logging, reading all the key logs, what you're touching, and it can see what you're reacting to. It's just reading the screen and seeing what you're typing. Yeah.
Amen. If we have no more questions, we're going to go ahead and close out. We want to thank